So, good morning, all you fly tyers. So I will start the business today. It shouldn't take too long for me to do mine. I'm doing a pattern called a Christmas chironomid. And this is the guy here. It was developed, at least I first found it, there was a fella in Edmonton who did a little bit of guiding on the local ponds. His name is Mike Monteith. The guys that knew him called him Doc. And he tied this pattern to represent an early stage of a hatching chironomid. And what happens when they pupate, these chironomids near the bottom, in order to get going up to the water column to hatch, the first thing they do is they put some air in their shuck. And so the red at the back is what you're seeing from the old bloodworm as the pupa starts to develop. So this is an intermediate stage of a chironomid adult. So the hooks that you can use are basically a curved nymph hook, and you put a bead on it mostly for weight rather than anything else. I was tying some with a black bead, which is this guy here, and that's the traditional original pattern. But I ran out of the right size black beads this week and I hadn't been down to Robinson's to get some more. So I'm going to use this one's a sort of an olive colored bead. It's a 1/8 inch. So that's this guy here, 1/8 inch brass bead. And I'm using a Partridge hook. As I said earlier, I happen to have a good supply of Partridge Czech nymph hooks. Now, Partridge sizes their hooks differently. This says a size 12, but this is actually, the gap is more like a size 8.5 or 10, between 8 and 10. So it's a fairly wide gap hook, and it's a pretty robust wire. So you could catch a monster on this. So I put the bead on, and then I will start the thread right behind the bead. And I'm using A-dot black. So I'll wrap to help the body adhere to the slippery shank. I'll coat the hook with thread all the way down. And because this is a curved pattern, you want to get as much shank as possible covered with the shiny material. So I'm going to take the thread right back down past where the point would normally be, almost to the end of the bend. And then I'll bring my thread right back up to the front again. Now this guy's going to have a rib. And I have two things I've used for ribs. One is a fine copper wire, which is what's on this guy here. But I tried it with this silver wire. It's a little heavier wire, and I kind of like the look of the silver wire. It adds just a little bit of flash to it. So I'm going to take a piece of silver wire, and rather than having this particular silver wire with the little rubber band thing that Florin has kindly shown us how to use, I'm going to just cut a piece off and tie it on. So I'll take my silver wire and stick it into the back of the bead, and then wrap right down the shank of the hook. And this goes on first, like all fly tying stuff. The stuff that gets wound forward last goes on first. So I'm going to keep that pretty much on top of the hook all the way down the shank until I get to the very end, and then I'm going to let the thread push it around on the far side of the hook. And I'm doing that because I want to counter wrap that rib all the way up the fly. And starting on the far side makes it a little easier to get an even wrapping. The same thing with the tinsel. I've got that here. Got to step it right behind the bead. And I'm going to lay, well, let's get it in there. Come on. Having trouble with my fingers today. This comes from playing around yesterday with these landscape lights that I couldn't get my fingers to work in the tight space on them. Come on. There we go. So I'm going to try and keep the shiny part on the top of the hook as I wrap it back. It doesn't have to be a tight wrap. And that's just to provide, again, a little more brightness in the color when I start wrapping. Then bring my thread forward again. And I'm going to just, to make this a little easier, I'll do a half hitch right behind the bead. Let the thread hang out of the way here on my bobbin rest. And I'll take the red stuff and go right to the very back of the hook, right where the tinsel is up against the wire. And I'll get it flat. I have to twist it a bit so it's flat. And then I'll wrap it in touching turns all the way up the shank of the hook. Try to overwrap it. That didn't work, that one didn't go over. Now, let's try it this way. There we go. That's more like it. And as I go, I just give it a little more space. Try to get it reasonably where it's touching turns all the way up. Maybe a little overlap. This thin stuff is a little too thin to get a really good overlap. So, but if you work at it, you can get it kind of overlapped. And rather than getting a bit of a bump in the middle where you attach the second piece of tinsel, I just wrap the red stuff all the way up to behind the bead. Wrap in front and in back. My fine pointed scissors in here and trim that off. And then we'll do the same thing with the green tinsel. I will stick the end of it into the bead. Tie it down and put it up on top, and then I will wrap back down where the red is, and I'm going to bring it down to kind of where the point of the hook is. I don't want it to be kind of half and half. I want a little less red than I've got green. Bring my thread up again. A quick little half hitch here. That just keeps the thread from unwinding as I do this. And then once again, twist the tinsel until it's flat. And I will start a wrap far enough back that I've just got a little bit of red showing at the back. There we go. And then wrap forward. And again, the beauty of having this thing on the spool with the keeper is that it's a little easier to keep twisting the spool and keeping the tinsel flat. I'm not getting a good overwrap here. I want to make sure I don't try not to leave red showing through where the green tinsel is. That's a little tricky with this fine tinsel. And I'll wrap that right up to immediately behind the bead again. And then when I get behind the bead, we'll do the same thing as we did with the red. Wrap behind to cinch it down. And in front. Trim it. Now the next piece, I'm not going to use the rotary feature on the vise. I'm just going to hang the thread out of the way. And I'm going to counter wrap it. I'll do it the opposite direction with the rib. So I'll start right at the back and try to keep a nice even wrap of rib up the shank of the hook. And if you hold it at a bit of an angle as you're wrapping forward, it'll walk up. If you try to keep that angle consistent, you'll get nice even wraps. And then when I get up here, right behind the bead, I will do the same thing. I'll take my thread behind, and because this is a fairly stiff wire, I'm going to do 3 or 4 wraps behind, and then 2 or 3 in front. And then just get the wire and go round and round and round and round until it breaks. Well, that one didn't. Oh well, oh well. Broke where I didn't want it to. There we go. I can bury that tip. And the last thing we do is we take a couple of strands of Peacock Herl. You want some, pick one out here that's reasonably fuzzy, a couple of them. And I'm going to use 2 strands so that I get a bit good amount of fuzz. You can, I have some better Herl, but this will do. Same thing, I'll take the tips of the Peacock Herl and just stick them right in behind the bead, right into the back of the bead. And then I'll wrap the Peacock Herl around the thread 5 or 6 times. And then I'll use the rotary portion of my vise to start wrapping around the hook right behind the bead. And doing this with the wrapped around the thread, it gives it a little strength. So if a fish gets his little teeth in there, it's not going to come loose. When I get the Peacock Herl, so it's just a little bit fatter than the bead, I'll do the same thing with this. I'll hold it up and I will go wrap behind a couple of wraps and then a couple of wraps in front. Peacock Herl off. Then I'll get my whip finisher and wrap right behind bead. 3 or 4 wraps. Trim the thread off. Now, the original recipe, he suggested that you use this stuff, Sally Hansens Hard as Nails, to give it a coating, but I've got better than that. I've got this Loon UV finish. This is the thick stuff, not too runny. So I'll just put a little bit on there. I'll put a little bit all the way down, because what we're going to do is kind of overcoat the wire. If you come out, I periodically have to get in here and clean out the nozzle on these things. There we go. When I get a little bit of that stuff on to smooth it out, I take my bodkin and just use the bodkin to kind of make sure it covers all the wire. Get a bit of a coating on there. I need a little more. It's not quite enough. I want to try and cover that wire with coating or Sally Hansens. Come on. It's being ornery this morning. There we go. That's better. Put a little excess and then I can take the vodka and clean it off and turn it upside down, make sure it's all spread around so that I get a fairly even coating of the UV resin around the hook shank. And then I'll take my UV light and zap it. Give it a good shot of UV light. And you will see now that you've got a nicely coated body. And that's it. Fairly straightforward. And fish this, if you're fishing it on a dropper with a little bit of weight in front of it, or if you're just letting it hang under a strike indicator, it will move around a little bit with current and with the bobber bopping down, up and down on the top. So you want to use a fairly light tippet to keep it from being affected too much by the strike indicator. So that's him. Fish him almost just slightly off the bottom, a foot off the bottom, foot to 18 inches. That's it. So I will stop the spotlight here. And we're back to normal. So there we go. The Christmas chronomid. So Florin, you're up.
Followed by the Booby. Well, that's one of those crazy things that's more or less a leech with a bit of foam at the head, really. And the foam is helping the fly float. So you just have to size up. You need to match the hook with the size of the foam. So at the end of the day, when you put this in water and you try to sink it, it'll come to the surface. And so the idea of a fly like this is that you fish it with a sinking line or a sink tip line in either a stream or lake, and the line will get it down for you, and the foam is going to float it above the bottom. Whether it's rocks or weeds you're trying to avoid, it's going to get your fly both down and just in that sort of fishy zone. So that's
how long a leader do you use?
A short leader, because the longer the leader, the higher the fly is going to ride. So, you know, speaking of leader in this case, it's almost the wrong thing. You just use what I normally do when I want to get down and close to the bottom kind of thing. If I fish a streamer, for example, I just put a 6 feet of mono, and I'm done. No 15-foot hard to cast things here, right? So short and sweet. Yeah, that's the idea. And you can vary. This is just one sample of this, right? So a fluffy tail that'll give you some nice action when it gets wet. Bit of sparkle for the body, and then the eyes. Okay, so the sizes I'm tying this on here these are size 10 curved hooks, because I just happen to like this particular size and style. There you go. I may have to move it later, because one of the challenges with with these curved hooks is that the angle that's right for tying in the tail is not the same angle that's right for tying in at the head. So you can try to find a compromise, but anyway. So for thread, I'm just using something that's reasonably thick. So in this case, I don't want to go too thin because that would not work well with foam. So put a thread base. Again, one of the challenges here is that the bare hook shank is going to be slippery. So when you tie the eyes on, you would definitely want to have a thread base at least at the point where you're tying the eye on. And so what I did here is, in this case, I'm using, for this size hook, I'm using pre-bought booby eyes. Then you can also cut your own. So out of one of these cylinders, I cut each of them in 3, and I find a third of one of these cylinders is about the right length to give me eyes. Alternatively, you can use if you can get it, and that's the challenge we were talking about a little bit earlier. I bought a block of foam, don't ask, this was expensive, and cut my own out of it. They come out very nice, and I can use these to float bigger hooks. Another less expensive alternative is to use, I found this, and these are just pieces that I trimmed from these larger ones. These are the ends of those interlocking mats of foam you get at a Canadian Tire. You get 4 pieces to a pack. I think in total you get about 16 square feet. And the tool that you will need is a sharpened piece of metal tubing, which in this particular example, this is just some brass tubing. And you see now it's a bit dull. I have to resharpen it. So all I do is I put it in a hand drill, and I hold it on a piece of sandpaper, and I sharpen the end. Okay, and after cutting a few bits of foam, you'll have to resharpen it. Okay? It doesn't so much get dull in the foam itself. It does get dull in the backing that you're going to use to be cutting on. In this case, it's a piece of cardboard. I was just looking for something somewhat soft, but still, it does do a little damage there. Okay, so enough talking about that. So then I'm just going to attach the eyes with a figure 8, just like dumbbells, except that in this case, oh, this was bad. Let me backtrack here. So first it helps if you see what you're doing. So there are many ways of doing this. One is try to do a loop of thread around the foam. You can't really see this because I'm holding it between my fingers, but this will help you gauge where that middle of that foam is, and then attach it with a figure 8 to the hook. So tighten the thread properly, pulling upwards. And that should do the trick. Okay. We now have the eyes at the front. And if you want them to be a bit looking more bulgy, take the scissors and trim around the edge of the cylinder, and that'll give it a more spherical shape, if you like that effect. And then continue with the thread base towards the tail. And for the tail, okay, and you can see now what I was talking about, the angle of the thread can slide. So then just do a few turns of thread here and back off a little bit, and then let it hang, and the thread is going to stay put. Now what I'm going to use for the tail is a little bit of marabou. Now the tail is going to be a little bit long, and so in order to keep it from going down and around the hook band, one way to do it is, you know, put a couple of turns of thread behind the tail. Another way to do it is at the same time adding a little bit of flash and using that flash as a little bit of support for the tail. This is a useful trick to use when you're tying streamers. So this is just regular pearl crystal flash. And it's sufficiently stiff to provide support for the marabou. I'm just gonna fold it. I don't want to have too much. It's just a hint of flash that I'm looking for. So fold it once, fold it one more time. That'll give me 4 strands. Okay. So here I have 4 strands of flash. I'm gonna measure it here. So this is a fairly short shank hook. So I'm gonna go a little bit longer than the hook shank, measuring from the eye, and trim it, and then tie it on. So hold it against here and wrap over it forward. Okay. We want to cock this up at a bit of an angle. Again, put 1 turn of thread behind the tail on the underside and another one on top that'll lock everything in perfectly. If you're not happy with the length, just trim a bit. Okay, then marabou, just strip off the size of a fluffy feather. I want the soft stuff. I don't want these, as soft as marabou is, this straight fibers here at the tip of a feather are a bit too stiff for my taste. So I'm just gonna pull this together. Again, measure it up. That's, again, more a matter of taste than anything else, in my opinion. Tie it in here. And secure. And if this is not tied far enough down on the body, just take the thread down a few more turns. Okay. Then I'm gonna trim this, and I'm ready to tie in some body material. For the body, again, you can either choose to stay with the same color scheme, or you want to go to a bit of contrast. That's your choice. So I'm aiming for chartreuse fly. So I'm using here a chenille that's really, really fine. So this is like a micro chenille. Okay, so I don't want something that is gonna bulk up the body too much. So tie this guy on. And move the thread forward. And I'm going to move the thread actually out of the way here. So when I get to the eyes, I'm going to move the thread between the eyes and up to the eye of the hook and leave it there. Okay, you can see where the thread is hanging down. So now I take this chenille and I'm going to wrap it on the shank the standard way. So then when I get to the eyes, I'm going to go once above and around the eye of the hook, and then behind I'm trying to maintain the symmetry of the eyes. Okay. And then back one more time. So this way I've covered the space between the two halves of the foam with the chenille. So it's all, there's no thread showing there. Now it wouldn't be a big deal because I'm using thread that's of the same color. Then secure the chenille with a couple of turns, and then before cutting it off, move the thread in front of the chenille, so in that little gap behind the eye of the hook, and then trim it. This way it's properly locked in, it's not going to go anywhere. And then time for a whip finish. And if the eyes are getting in the way, you can always, when you do the whip finish, just hold them back a little bit, like this. And you can happily whip finish without clogging up the eye of your fly. So one whip finish, I'm not going to use any cement here, so just 2 whip finishes. And there we go. Ah. There you go. So this is the Booby style of tying. I'd call it a micro leech, really, in this case, with a bit of foam to float it. And I've tried a few color variations here. I've done some with, so here I went for contrast rather than same color. So this is with a Canadian Tyer foam. And this is a freebie from the knitting club here, or I should say the Knitters Guild. Some kind of a sparkly pink wool with pink marabou, again supported by a bit of crystal flash, right? So this is like the foam here is a bit oversized for the hook side. What else did I try for color? I have another one with you can get that Canadian Tyer foam also in pink. There you go. So this is pink all around. And then with the yellow foam that I showed you earlier, I had a piece of foam that was too short to tie on perpendicular to the hook shank. So I decided to try to see what happens if I just tie the fly and then stick the foam in at the end and then secure it with an extra. I put a bit of super glue there to be on the safe side, and then I tied over. It still floats well and is going to displace some water. I'm thinking of trying this particular trick with maybe a slightly bigger hook and maybe a slightly different color combo, and try it out for bass with a floating line this time. More like a popper. I think this might do a micro, because the thing with poppers, you know, the standard recipes call for fairly large sizes. I guess they're fine as far as they go for pike and very large bass, but for the little guys, I think micro poppers should be the just a ticket. And that's my fly. You can use whatever materials you have and use whatever color combination you think might be a good idea. And I would try to find the right color combination and materials and see if I can get heavier salmon hooks. I know they can be floated with foam. It's just you need a lot more foam than these little bits I've been using here.
Okay. Okay. So I guess that's it for today. So we'll stop recording.
Mhm.